And he's an anti-vaxxer too. I didn't. So we were always silent about it in our community, and we always had religious exemptions for our children going to school. I ran a camp. We used to run a day camp for many years, and of course, I always accepted other parents' religious exemptions. In fact, I would even help them articulate their religious concerns. But I never want to take a public stance on vaccines. What prompted me to do that was back in August of 2019, after I learned that 25,000 children in publics were not allowed to return to public school in New York State, and that's 25,000 public school children, another 5,000 or so Catholic school children or other private school children, and another at least 10,000 Jewish private school children. So we're talking over 40,000 children that were cruelly denied an education and were going to be condemned to illiteracy because their parents would not allow them to have the vaccinations. And when I started to research it, and I don't live in New York, I live in Massachusetts. Fortunately, we still have religious exemption in Massachusetts. But I do know that I did have attending a boarding school, a high school in Queens, in New York. And the headmaster of the school called me and said, "Oh, your son cannot return to school in September 2019 without being fully vaccinated, according to the Department of Health in New York State." And I said, "Well, humor me." I said, "Not that I have any intention of doing that. Give me the list of vaccines that he needs to have." And he said, "Well, it's on their website, Department of Health." I went to the Department of Health and I started reading, and of course I saw the hepatitis B vaccine. So I thought that was very bizarre, because the hepatitis B vaccine is not, a child who has it could even attend school. It's a sexually transmitted disease, and or a person could catch it through using unclean hypodermic needles. So I called the headmaster back and I said, "I don't understand. Is there something going on in the school that I should know about? Why are they they're deeming my son unworthy of an education if he didn't take a shot for this sexually transmitted disease?" So they said, "Well, the Rabbi so-and-so sanctioned that. That's what the state is requiring." I called the rabbi. The rabbi denied it. And then I found that the rabbi of that community was allowing schools to enforce state policy, and he was just turning a blind eye. He was just saying, "Well, you do what you have to do to stay in business, and whatever the state requires." So I was really furious. So that's when I began that was the first time I spoke out, and I wrote letters. I sent them to rabbis all over the country and all over the world. And I the teaching of the Talmud. The Talmud, there is no greater, the very first state, state in the United States of America that said that education is a right, and every child is entitled to an education, and every community is required to pay for education of every child in their community, was the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1789, and I think it was called the Child Education Act or something. And then after that, every other state passed similar laws. Well, that was in 1789. Before that, back about in the year 50 of Common Era, a couple decades before the destruction of the Second Holy Temple in Jerusalem, so about 1950 years ago or more, 1960 years ago, the rabbinic court in Jerusalem declared that it is an obligation for every community. It's a communal obligation to make sure that every child receives an education if the parents cannot provide one themselves. And every community must tax every single inhabitant of the city, whether they have children or not, because that's a communal obligation. The Talmud said that this obligation was so severe that it was declared at that time that any town, any city that does not provide an education, basic literacy, to every child in that community, the city should be excommunicated. That means that Jewish people would be banned from living in a city like that does not provide the education needs of all the children in the community. And then the Talmud goes a step further and says that this was such a dire problem in Jerusalem around the time of the destruction of the temple, is that they quoted a verse from prophets from Jeremiah that there is no greater divine wrath when children are prevented from learning. So, and that the destruction of Jerusalem took place because children were wrongly prevented from going to school. So I wrote in this op-ed that every rabbi, every community, every synagogue on earth that stands by idly and quietly when children in that community, Jewish or not Jewish, are prevented from getting an education because of unjust public health policies, that rabbi, that community, that synagogue, that city should be excommunicated. There is no greater anathema to our faith. So what happened was, that was when I started speaking out about it. So after that time, after that, I started publicly. I've been so far. I've had a chance to testify. I've had a chance to speak in 6 states actually, and I've given over 35 pages of testimony to Connecticut, to New Jersey, Massachusetts, and others, and New York. And people quite often, they ask me, well, who are you? Do you have a medical degree? Why are you speaking about medical matters if you're just a rabbi? Shouldn't rabbis stick to religious matters and let doctors talk about public health policies and so on and so forth? So I would just like to address that, and I'll give you back the mic, Dr. Rima, if you have particular questions for me. I just wanted to state something very plainly and very clearly. It's not my place. It's your place. You're a doctor. You're a medical doctor. I don't have that much medical background. My grandfather was a doctor at Kaiser, and I have other medical experts in my family, but but I have a different area of expertise, and that is ethics and morality. That's my area of expertise. And what I'd like to remind everyone is that even if all of the science behind mandatory vaccine policies were true, and I know that it's not, and I know it's debatable, and I know that it might be just the opposite. But even if everything Dr. Fauci and Dr. I don't know who, Dr. Paul Offit and all of these doctors, and all of these medical doctors, the Gedalia Society and all these medical doctors who endorse vaccination, even if their science were true, and even if, let's just say that it were correct, that if, I don't know the numbers, you'll correct me, but the numbers they cite all the time, 95% of the population, let's say, had immunity or had a vaccine for measles, let's just say, then that would confer herd immunity, and then the disease would be obliterated or would disappear from that place. Even if that were true, and even if we could say definitively that if 95% of the kids in the school took the vaccine, then there's much lower chance in the community for anyone else catching measles. Let's just say that vulnerable immunocompromised people who can't take the vaccine would now be at risk, but if their herd immunity paradigm were not achieved. Even if that were true, this is a moral ethical issue here, because now if you take it a step further and say, okay, there's such a thing called herd immunity, but now, does that oblige me as a parent or as an individual to subject my child to a medical risk, even if it's a tiny, minuscule medical risk, but it's a medical risk nonetheless? Am I morally obliged to subject my child to a risk for the sake of the so-called herd, even if I would know for a fact that it would protect the herd, it would protect those vulnerable people down the street? Let's just accept that science if it were true. That is no longer a scientific question. That is a moral, ethical question. That you ought to do something, you are morally obliged to do something. That is a moral, ethical question. And that, my friends, I always remind the doctors and the scientists, that is not your area of expertise. That's my area. And not only it's my area of expertise, but it's every single American citizen has the First Amendment. And the First Amendment means that you are entitled to be the high priest, the big kahuna of your own personal religion. You do not need a state-sponsored religion. There shouldn't even be such a thing. You do not need a so-called what do they say all the time? Major world religion. You do not need a clergy, a recognized clergy member to sanction your religion. You are entitled, as an individual, are entitled to your own religious, moral, ethical, philosophical views, and you are your own clergy, and you are your own Bible. So as a person who studied religion for many, many, many years, I question that paradigm of herd immunity. I would say to that person, I would say, listen, I've studied, yes, exactly. I would say that that the Bible, and I've studied this, I've pored over the biblical texts and Talmudic texts and 3,000 years of Judaic scholarship. I've studied it. I've studied all the recent responsa from rabbis in the recent number of hundreds of years. I have not found not one single basis, precedent, rationale to support the value of herd immunity that would then sanction or even permit me to subject my child to medical risk when my child is not at risk for measles, because measles is a benign childhood illness that the vast overwhelming majority of children recover from measles, and that's the way it was for hundreds of years, and therefore for me to submit my child to a medical procedure that carries known and unknown medical risks, documented and undocumented medical risks, and contains toxic ingredients that are known to be toxic, it is categorically forbidden by the Jewish faith, and I would say by anyone, by biblical faith. Anyone who embraces the Bible, it would be categorically prohibited from subjecting your child to that product. And I'm not talking about experimental products, Dr. Rima. That opens up a whole other can of worms. I'm talking about FDA approved products like the polio vaccine or the measles vaccine, MMR, and so on and so forth. And I'm not even getting into the whole topic of fetal DNA. That's also not even getting into that topic. I'm just talking about that's something which is really important that I'd like to remind all your viewers that this is not the question of whether injection or not is not a medical or scientific question. It's a ethical, moral value, and that you are your own